I think history is important. We cannot sideline history. And I think what we need to remember in Kashmir always is Kashmiriyat and the idea of India that existed in Kashmir. And Kashmiriyat goes back centuries. It's interesting, not many people would know this, that Sheikh Abdullah in his autobiography, Atish-e-Chinar, has devoted a whole chapter on Kashmiri Pandits. There were plenty of Muslims who protected Kashmiri Pandits. And once the Pandits left, some of the Kashmiri Muslims also took over their properties. That also is a fact. The point is, so much has been made of the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, which is a terrible tragedy. There's no doubt about it. But there's no mention of Chatti Singhpura when Sikhs were massacred. Targeting a community or targeting some people doesn't lead to genocide. And Kashmiri Pandits just left.
Hello and welcome to HT's weekly talk show, The Interview. The film Kashmir Files has generated enough controversy, allegedly peddled half-truths too, and milked hatred. Yes, milked hatred. In our two-part series that commenced last week, we spoke to well-known politician Sitaram Yechury, sifting truth from lies. In this edition and the second part, we speak to Amarjeet Singh Dulat, formerly Chief of RAW and later advisor to Jammu and Kashmir in the Prime Minister's office. Mr. Dulat served in Kashmir through those troubled times which the film dramatizes. So if A.S Dulat debunks the film, he must be having good reasons to do so. Let us find out in this edition of HD's weekly talk show, The Interview. Welcome to the show, Mr. Dulat, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Kumkumji, for thinking of me.
Let me begin by what you said about Kashmir, and I quote, "I was there when it all began. It was pretty nasty times that winter of 1989-90, unquote. Take me through that same period where the controversial movie The Kashmir Files is set.
See, can I take you a little back to history?
Of course.
Because I think history is important. We cannot sideline history. And I think what we need to remember in Kashmir always is Kashmiriyat and the idea of India that existed in Kashmir. And Kashmiriyat goes back centuries. And it's interesting, not many people would know this, that Sheikh Abdullah in his autobiography, Atish-e-Chinar, has devoted a whole chapter on Kashmiri Pandits. And he reminds us that the first Prime Minister, the founder of modern India, was a Kashmiri Pandit. That the person who conceived the idea of Pakistan, Allama Iqbal, was descended from Kashmiri Pandits. And Sheikh himself was descended from Kashmiri Pandits. So I think this is sometimes lost in this whole haze and maze of things that we talk about. I think it's important to remember this. And the reason that Kashmiriyat continued and flourished in Kashmir is because the Kashmiri Muslim most of them were converts from Pandits. And they lived together for centuries. So I think this needs to be remembered in the background of what we are talking about, 89 and 90. That, of course, was, if I've said nasty, it's putting it very mildly. It was a terrible winter. And the other thing which people need to remember is that when you think of Kashmir today and the Kashmir of the winter of 89, 90, there's a world of difference. So when these things started to happen, and everything exploded after the kidnapping of Rubia Saeed, unfortunately. And then things really got out of hand because these boys, as I call them, the JKLF boys, there were huge celebrations on the 13th of December 1989 when those 5 people were released in exchange for rupiah. And it was like Diwali in Srinagar. I can't forget it. And these boys were out collecting funds for the movement for Azadi. And they began to believe till the summer of 1990 that Azadi was around the corner. And at that point of time, let me tell you, everybody was a target. I myself felt that I was a target. And we had lost 4 officers of ours who had been killed in the space of 3 weeks. So you can understand the kind of feeling of panic threat that there was. And of course, in all this, Kashmiri Pandits were targeted. But before it began with the Kashmiri Pandits, let me say that National Conference workers were targeted. So it was bad times, you know.
You said that Kashmiri Pandits were targeted, and you also said that Muslims were targeted, like many others. So would you agree that the film has deliberately, shown a one-sided portrayal with the sole purpose of spreading hatred?
It is certainly polarizing society. And it will further polarize Kashmir, which will be very, very sad. As it is, Kashmir is sufficiently polarized. And I shudder to think if violence erupts again.
But you said Muslims also protected Kashmiri Pandits who decided to stay back. The film again doesn't show any of that.
Yes, there were plenty of Muslims who protected Kashmiri Pandits. And once the Pandits left, some of the Kashmiri Muslims also took over their properties. That also is a fact. The point is, so much has been made of the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, which is a terrible tragedy. There's no doubt about it. But there's no mention of Chatti Singhpura when 6 were massacred. There's no mention of Gunan Poshpura, where Muslim girls were raped in very large numbers.
You know, the film has flagged the exodus as genocide. Would you agree with it being a genocide, or would you see it as an exodus?
It was not genocide. They were targets like a lot of other people were targets. As I'm saying, I felt very insecure there.
So why do you say it was not a genocide?
Targeting a community or targeting some people doesn't lead to genocide, you know. And Kashmiri Pandits just left. Now Mr. Jagmohan is blamed for the exodus. I was there. I'm not aware if Jagmohan encouraged people to leave. What I can tell you was that Jagmohan would be very relieved when the Kashmiri Pandits left.
You know, you have said, like Dr. Farooq Abdullah, that the film is a propaganda movie and therefore you don't want to see it. Would you take me through that?
I don't want to see a dark movie which is exaggerated, which is propaganda. Why would I want to see it? But why would I want to see something which is propaganda? And I didn't know that Farooq was being made the villain of this movie because that's so unfair. The exodus and the genocide that you referred to happened after Farooq resigned. He had resigned on the 19th of January, and most of the exodus and most of the killings happened after that. Are we forgetting that Mufti Muhammad Saeed was the Home Minister?
So what is the point you're making?
The point I'm making is that was he not responsible for what was happening in Kashmir? Is the Union Home Minister not responsible for national security? I'm not pointing a finger at Mufti Sahib. What I'm trying to say is that pointing a finger at Farooq is not fair.
But the film does exactly that and doesn't even mention Mufti Saeed.
It's a propaganda film because elections are possibly going to happen in Kashmir. And Mufti Sahib is no longer alive. But Mehbooba knows all this.
And that is why she has said that it is weaponizing the pain of the Kashmiri Pandits.
There you are. It is in a sense weaponizing.
In fact, Dr. Farooq Abdullah said that by making the movie tax-free, the government is penetrating hatred into people's hearts.
The fact of the matter is that, this movie, I'm sure is going to make a lot of money.
It already has.
It has, and it will continue to make money. So by the end of it, Mr. Agnihotri will be a rich man, and good luck to him.
But this is, I see it less about making money than fulfilling a political agenda. And by peddling half truths, there seems to be a pattern in this.
I'm with you in that. Yeah. That's why I called it propaganda. Or as Mehbooba says, weaponizing. Let me remind you of those days and that time. I'll remind you of a particular day. In fact, there were 2-3 very bad days at that time. On the 19th of January, Jagmohan Sahib was reappointed governor. And he came to Jammu immediately. There were huge celebrations in Jammu that evening. Our friend Sardar Joginder Singh was IG CRPF, who was to later become Director CBI. On the 20th, he rounded up a whole lot of boys from the city because he thought that this was one way he would please the new incoming governor. He didn't know who he was rounding up. And that night, there were huge protests in the city. And people came out of mosques. And it was a terrible, terrible night that we went through. And I was at a colleague's place for dinner. And my younger colleague from Gupkar called me up and said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm at Barzola." He says, "Please sleep there. Don't try to come back. The city is on fire." Now, the next day, Mr. Jagmohan arrives. And he immediately calls me. And I go to see Mr. Jagmohan. And I find that he's giving Sardar Joginder Singh hell. Yeah. Why did you do that? You made life so much more difficult for me. And the rest, as I said, is history. Now I've heard, I've read and I've heard that buses were provided and trucks were provided to help Pandits leave. Frankly, I don't remember. Possibly there may have been. But I would not hold Mr. Jagmohan responsible for the exodus. The exodus happened because of the threat to the Kashmiri Pandits. So just try and imagine the bigger scenario instead of getting hooked on to genocide.
So what you're saying and what I understand is that it was not Hindus versus Muslims, but Hindus and Muslims. And this is one fact that the film has actually distorted.
Well, it's sad if it's distorted, that fact, because that's the whole crux of this thing of Kashmir. Now, Kashmiri Pandits are in denial about Kashmir.
There is another accusation about the filmmaker of exhibiting communalism and manipulating facts. Would you agree?
As I said, it's going to polarize Kashmir further. It's dangerous, this polarization. Already, it looked dangerous to me. It has been looking dangerous to me for some time.
You were speaking about polarization, and there's something very interesting which has been said about this film. One goes to see it as an Indian and comes out as a Hindu or a Muslim. Would you agree with this perception?
I don't know. I cannot comment, madam. I've not seen the movie and I cannot comment.
What do you make of the BJP government backing the film? The Prime Minister has endorsed it. The BJP state governments have granted, of course, tax exemptions. Do you think there is more than meets the eye?
I cannot cast aspersions on a Prime Minister. And what the BJP is up to, I don't know. But what I can say is that this film, as I see it, sitting in Delhi, is being released. The timing has been released. Is such that it's after a very successful election of the BJP and another one that they're targeting now in J&K.
There is more than meets the eye.
So I think it's quite obvious. I don't think it's more than meets the eye. it's quite clear that the J&K elections, I think, possibly will happen before the end of the year. And people have got the elections in mind.
So, in one sense, you subscribe to the view that subservient elements in the film industry have been used to further a political agenda.
You see, why do we blame the film industry alone? I think, isn't this happening in the media as well? Hasn't the media become subservient? I was very surprised when you asked me that you want to talk to me. Because, I'm not the most favorite person in Delhi.
So, what would you say about subservient elements in the film industry and about our creative artists?
I don't think there are too many subservient elements in the film industry, although a lot of them have been put under a lot of pressure.
This film is not an example of pressure. This seems to be voluntary. And I think the filmmakers, if I may use the term, have crawled when they were asked to bend.
All right, I go along with you because I really don't know. Anupam Kher is an outstanding actor, but of late he has a certain slump.
And political ambition.
I don't think he is aspiring to become prime minister, but whatever else.
Omar Abdullah has said that when Kashmiri Pandits left the valley, his father, Dr. Farooq Abdullah, was not the chief minister. And it was VP Singh's government at the center, supported by the BJP. And this fact has again been conveniently ignored, in fact, distorted.
Omar is absolutely right, because this is exactly what I said, that, if you hold Farooq responsible, then all of us who were there at that point of time are equally responsible. I was there much longer than Farooq. Farooq resigned on the 19th of January. I was still there till March. And so I saw a little more than Farooq saw. So the point really is, and that is why this is a new nuance given to the whole story. People who now accuse Farooq Abdullah should listen to his speech of the 15th of August, 1989. I was there, present in the stadium, and the stadium was 3/4 empty, and there were bombs exploding outside. And the manner in which Farooq spoke, one felt proud to be an Indian there. Nobody could have been more nationalist than Farooq was on that particular day. So I would advise people who criticize Farooq. Farooq himself may not remember this, but that's a speech worth listening or hearing.
There is something which has been said about this film, and the observation being that it is presentation in its crudest form with the objective to trivialize tragedy.
Maybe, I don't know. To my mind, it's a sad film because we are making a tragedy of a tragedy of a tragedy, And as I said, we are forgetting our facts, we are forgetting history, we are bypassing what we don't like. As I said, Chatti Singh Pura, Kunan, Poshpura, how can you forget all this? It happened soon after the Pandits left.
Mr. Amarjit Singh Dulat, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being there with us.
Thanks, Kumkum. Thank you very much, madam.